welcome to the SImple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. I'm your host, Shannon Ables, and whether you're listening on your commute, exercising, working in the garden, or sitting down with a hot cup of tea or a cafe au lait, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Gaining knowledge and wisdom about life's workings has always been a curiosity of mine. And as I discover new insights and truths about life, I am quickly reminded of how much I do not know. As the maxim goes, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know, right? And so I look to those who are full of wisdom or have more experience or who have a better understanding of life. And I am constantly asking them questions, or I'm at least trying to sit back and listen and observe what they have done in their lives, how it's worked out, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to begin with today's quote from Socrates, the Greek philosopher that is given the label of being the founder of Western philosophy. I'm going to share this quote with you, and part of it you're probably going to recognize. Okay, here we go. Quote, "I say that it is the greatest good for a man to discuss virtue every day, and those other things about which you hear me conversing and testing myself and others, for the unexamined life is not worth living." The last part of that quote is probably what you're more familiar with or most familiar with, as it is often quoted on quotable pages or Pinterest or even on Twitter. So I'm going to say it one more time because it really is the focal point of today's podcast. The unexamined life is not worth living. I was intrigued by this quote. I've been intrigued by this quote, and I'm always shaking my head in agreement. Yes, that's true. I get it. But do I really get it? What does it really mean? What is an unexamined life? And as I said, Socrates is credited with this quote. And what's funny or what's intriguing or what always captures my attention is that upon his death, he continually believed and stated to his executioners that I am not wise. I am not wise. All right. And if he, this great philosopher, didn't think he was wise, whoa, where are we? Where do we put ourselves if we think we are wise? Shouldn't we reevaluate that? So in today's podcast, we are going to figure out what exactly is an examined life. Will my examined life be the same as yours? With these questions on my mind recently, I was determined to resolve my quandary. So what is the examined life? And to simplify it, is it possible to simplify it? That, I think, was the first initial question I had. However, it's interesting to note, I was cautioned almost immediately. As soon as I started doing research, I was cautioned immediately away from this idea of pinpointing exactly the detailed specifics of trying to figure out what an examined life was. So I'm going to share with you this quote that was served basically as a warning as to what the examined life is not. Quote, "The allure of those who offer to provide clear answers, simple directions, precise instructions, so that you may set aside examination and merely comply or unthinkingly follow custom and practice, perhaps living a conventional moral life rather than an unexamined ethical life." So the goal today is sharing what I found to be those 5 key components to examine life, but they are not to be parsed out in detail to give you specifics as to what to do. How you follow these instructions, how you go about it, is going to be completely up to you, because they're going to be simply general overarching ideas that are basically regularly prompting you to live mindfully each day. And as we talked last week in the podcast number 9, there are many ways to live mindfully. But now we're going to take it one step further. What is the purpose of living mindfully? Well, ultimately, it's to help you live an examined life. So let's dive in. Number 1, determine the why. Whether it's the biggest why question of them all, why am I here? Or a seemingly small and insignificant why question, why do I want to dye my hair red instead of blonde? You get the idea. Get to the bottom of your motivation for making any decision. As you travel through life, proceed cautiously, understanding your reasons for pursuing a certain career, marrying a particular person, taking or not taking a risk that others believe is a no-brainer, or deciding whether or not to have kids, or moving to a new destination, or refusing to travel at all. Is it fear or courage that motivates you? Certainty or doubt that comforts you? Or better yet, is it your own internal compass that points the way? Or is it society's? Most definitely, with every life-altering decision that you make, ask why. And I think that's huge. If you just get in that habit of asking yourself why, you're at least giving yourself pause. You're at least getting yourself off of cruise control per se, right? Now this might slow your journey down. It might slow your pace down from time to time. But much like racing, for example, racing to that train station to jump on the first train that comes by, only to discover, and I have done this, literally have done this, that it is going in entirely the wrong direction, you actually will save yourself valuable time and eliminate unnecessary stress by simply slowing down, asking why, making sure it is in line with what you value, making sure it is in line with what you generally want for your life and not society or someone else in your life. You actually do save yourself so much time, so much unnecessary stress and angst. Take a breath, ask why, and then proceed forward. That's number one. Number two, determine your currency. Amy Poehler, in her new book that's coming out tomorrow, actually, called Yes, Please, states, there is a moment in your life when you have some say as to what your currency is going to be. I decided early on it was not going to be my looks. Humorist Amy Poehler has a point here. We determine what will be our fuel to carry us through life. We have that choice. At some point along the way, we have a choice. And the only way to arrive at the answer that is the truth is to get to know ourselves, to be truthful with ourselves, to be loving, and to be honest with ourselves. And I have a feeling that most of us don't realize how amazing we could be. I have a feeling, like Amy's self-deprecating last point about her looks, we shortchange ourselves. There is a truth to what she says, however. Her, with her intelligence, her winsome charm, her wit, her delivery, far exceed her looks. And that is hard to do, because she is beautiful. But to really cultivate and polish the gifts that reside within each of us is to honor what we've been given. If you aren't certain about what it is that makes you you, what your currency is, ask those you love and trust to point out what they see as your strengths and remind you of the weaknesses that you may be letting hold you back. Because sometimes we focus on what's not right, what's not working, what we aren't. And when we can't see ourselves clearly, we need those people to kind of place a different mirror in front of us to remind us what we are truly gifted with, or to remind us of those attributes that we seem to look past for whatever reason. And when we can finally see ourselves through those people's eyes, those people that have they love us unconditionally. There's no reason for manipulation. They simply want the best for us. And they're going to be truthful. That is when we can be reminded of how amazing we can be. And often that is when we realize our currency. So when we realize our currency, then we can start developing it. Then we can start investing in it. Then we can start persevering and being willing to struggle and learn and grow, because it isn't until we actually pay something our time, give it our time, that something can flourish. But often we don't know what our talent is because we just assume everyone else has the same talent, and that's not true. That is not true. So number 2 is determine your currency. Number 3 is to exercise self-control. To understand and know the path that we are choosing to embark on is one we have chosen after self-examination, realization of our own true motivations, and being honest with ourselves. And the ability to have self-control and discipline then immediately becomes far easier. When we know what it is we're pursuing, when we have a goal in mind, it's easier to say no to things that don't align with that. It's so much easier. Now, it's still not easy. It's just easier because there's going to be temptations along the way. But that's the that's the first part of being able to exercise self-control, is to determine where you're going, what you want to achieve in your life. So now having self-control doesn't mean living a life that is void of all pleasure, but it does mean incorporating the right pleasures and avoiding the wrong ones. So what's the difference between the right ones and the wrong ones? After all, at the end of every podcast, I share a petit plaisir, and I think I'm contributing to good pleasures, but that's not necessarily the case. It really just depends on you. It depends on where you are in your life and what you're striving for and how you enjoy your time and why you're enjoying those pleasures. All right. So let me explain the difference between higher pleasures and lower pleasures as they are defined in the philosophy world. In these terms, you will want to focus on the higher pleasures as being the pleasures you want to pursue. Understandably, the lower pleasures being more animalistic, more easy to come by, I guess you could say. But let me give you some examples. Lower pleasures, which some philosophers say really aren't pleasures necessarily, are merely a result from avoiding or removing pain, however temporary, from our lives. For example, comfort food after having a bad day, that would be a lower pleasure, or a pleasure that simply is trying to numb a pain that we're feeling at that time. And here's an extreme example: having sex with anybody when you are lonely. And I say that extreme just to kind of give you a really clear definition of what lower pleasures are. That's very animalistic, right? You're trying to fill a void, something that's missing. You're trying to stop the pain. Another extreme would be using drugs to avoid the realities of one's life that things aren't going so great. All right. On the flip side, the higher pleasures is pursuing what you want, but not because you have unfulfilled desires. For example, pursuing anything that will increase your overall or general happiness rather than pursuing a fleeting high that will afterwards leave you with regret or worse off than you were initially. So enjoying that truffle at the end of the day isn't bad if it's enjoyed as a pleasure for eating well throughout the entire day, or for simply unwinding and relaxing, which provides a balance to a well-lived, healthy life. That's a good pleasure. That is a higher pleasure. There's not going to be regret after that. The same can be said for, say, for example, an intimate moment with a significant other. As you are building that bond, establishing trust, or enjoying a glass of wine with dinner, not to drown out the day, but to enjoy a meal punctuated with good company and conversation, you are adding value to your day. You're not filling a void. You're adding something to your day. Not because you're lacking something. You're enhancing your life. These higher pleasures are those that stimulate the intellect. And while often the feel-good or lower pleasures don't occur instantaneously, when it does down the road, after all that self-discipline and self-control you've exercised, the pleasure and delight will far exceed any momentary pleasure that a lower pleasure would have given if pursued. I want to really quickly share two definitions with you to kind of keep in mind, trying to distinguish the difference between this higher pleasure versus lower pleasure. The first is hedonist or hedonism. Simply this idea that you are seeking pleasure for pleasure's sake, right? You have no higher desire. It's just in the moment, feel good now, please, kind of a feeling. And then on the flip side, you have this eudaimonism, which is people who want or seeking for their lives a meaningful purpose. So you have hedonists on one side and eudaimonists on the other. And they have two totally different goals for life. One is purely for pleasure's sake. The other is pleasure may come and there will be pleasure as part of it, but the ultimate goal isn't to feel that momentary pleasure. It is for the higher good or for a more meaningful life. And however you define that is up to you based on your belief system. And yes, pleasure will be maybe not instantaneous every single time, but as I said, often with that self-control, you actually enhance the pleasure down the road. and knowing that you left a legacy behind, knowing that you cultivated strong relationships, knowing that you are proud or at least content with how you've lived is the ultimate goal, rather than that momentary bit of a high that leaves you with regret. So that's number 3. Before we get to the last 2 ways that you can live an examined life, I'd like to take a quick intermission, a 1-minute intermission, and I will see you on the other side. Welcome back. Number 4 on how to live an examined life is to understand the power of money. Now, we've talked about money before on the podcast number 2, in fact, but now let's talk about it with regards to living that examined life. So tying in with the discussion we just had prior to the intermission about pleasure, so often, naively, we assume that more money equates to more happiness. But rather, it is our choices of what we do with our money that will determine our happiness. In other words, how we direct our money to be used, whether it be to save for the future, to experience moments that won't be forgotten, those are going to be decisions that ultimately will enhance our happiness and our feeling of living a more content and fulfilling life, rather than simply acquiring more stuff that we think at the moment will bring us happiness, but ultimately that is fleeting, that is momentary, right? So much like how we choose to use our intelligence or our abilities or our looks, only when we use those things wisely, only when we use our money wisely, will good events and feelings follow. And the only way to know how to use our money wisely is to start from the beginning. What is the reason for us doing anything? Why do we work? What is it that we want to do with our money? Where are we going with our lives? What do we want to bring to the world, to our family, to our friends, to our loved one? And thus using our money in a manner that is in line with those goals. So that's number 4, understanding the power of money, respecting it. And the last one, number 5, is to determine what is truly just. While the maxim states one must first learn the rules before you can break them, you probably heard that before, the same can be true for living an examined life. We must first understand the context or reason for the laws that we live under, as well as the unwritten rules that society either imposes or tries to impose on us before we will stand up against them if they seem unjust or their reasoning is off base. I want to share a quote with you from Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from the Birmingham jail. He writes, quote, "One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. And the key is to examine closely and carefully first, and then find the courage to act with discipline or restraint if the laws are just or the rules are just and they are in line with what you see to be fit as an examined life. Or if you do not believe that the laws or rules are just or fitting or fair or necessary, then to act accordingly, peacefully, but necessarily, disobeying, but seeking change for the better, seeking change for improvement, not destruction. All right, to leave people better than they were previously. So that's number 5. And that was one big focus for Socrates, was this whole idea of what is justice, what is just. And while people can tell us what it is, and while many of the points they point out we may agree with, we need to understand the why behind those laws or rules or dictates by society and ask ourselves, is that correct? If we look back into history, right? If we look back into history, so much has evolved, so much has changed, right? I mean, we had women not voting. We had people only voting based on skin color. We had people voting based on property. Things have obviously changed a lot in so many of our countries, but it didn't change just because we wanted it to. It changed because people took a moment, examined life and the world in the context of why things were going on, and then chose to do something with it, or to do something about it, or to use their lives to be a model or an example. And that's a pretty powerful tool to use your life. So I know we've kind of dived into a little philosophy, a little bit of repeat with regards to the money and so on and so forth. But I hope you realize that these are 5 simple ways that you can kind of keep in the back of your mind every day on how to live an examined life. And so long as you're not walking or moving forward blindly, and you're aware of where you're going and why you're going there, whatever it is, no matter if it's just cooking dinner at night rather than going out to the restaurant, or going to the restaurant instead of cooking dinner at night. No, there is no right or wrong way, as long as it fits well with where you're going and what you need in your life. Then you are living an examined life. You are. But it's about living consciously. Ultimately, by living in this examined life, we are giving ourselves this amazing gift. We receive a sense of freedom, of clarity, and thus peace. Again, Socrates reiterates, quote, "We must examine and understand the universe that dwells within our own soul." So make it a regular practice to converse with yourself, to converse with others, and accept that while we will never have all the answers, after all, there are endless questions, we can do ourselves a tremendous favor by refusing to live blindly. Thank you for tuning in to the 10th podcast of the SImple Sophisticate. For all the show notes from today's podcast, you can find them at www.thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast10, and it'll have all the links to blog posts that are relevant and the quotes as well. All right, stay tuned for this week's Petit Plaisir, where I'll talk about a cookbook that I have a feeling you will want to have on your kitchen counter. Many of my readers on the blog know I am a diehard fan of Ina Garten, also known as the Barefoot Contessa. If it's Sunday morning, I will be watching or taping her cooking show on the Food Network. And while I tune in for her always delicious recipes, I have not had a recipe yet that I've tried from hers that wasn't wonderful. I love her brownie pudding, and her wild mushroom risotto is a go-to favorite for weekends as well as weekdays, depending on if it's for 1 or 2 people or a ton of people. It just is always a crowd pleaser. But I also tune in and I love to see how she entertains. It's always so low-key, but also so very elegant. It just seems to blend that concept of quality over quantity. It's not all the fuss, but it always looks beautiful and wonderful, and the food is always the star. And I love that. And that's part of why I love watching the show, is that it comes with a ton of ideas. And it doesn't hurt that her house in East Hampton is absolutely exquisite, and her yard is always something to dream about. Her herb garden, for example, or her flower gardens, and her hedges. Okay, I could go on and on, but you get the idea. There's always inspiration with Barefoot Contessa. So in her 9th cookbook called Make It Ahead, it is being released tomorrow, October 28th, and it is full of recipes that simply answer the question that she says is her number 1 question from readers: can I make this recipe ahead of time? And so she goes through all sorts of details and shares all sorts of recipe from all 4 seasons on how you can make recipes in advance, how far in advance you can make them, and every little step that you can do ahead of time so that you can enjoy the dinner with your guests. Or even if it's a weeknight, you can relax because your meals were prepped a couple of days ahead of time over the weekend so that your work week is less stressful. Not only does her book have these recipes, as with all of her cookbooks, her pictures are beautiful, and she has little simple tips just kind of sprinkled throughout on how to make sure that you as a hostess can enjoy your gathering just as much as your guests. So with the holidays coming around, I thought this would be a good suggestion for you to maybe peruse through, if nothing else, but maybe pick up as well. Because after all, I mean, there's so many things to do with the holidays, so many things, whether it is an event at your house or not. Our calendars just start to fill up. Even when I say I'm not going to get so busy, somehow it tweaks and it changes in something. But I always love bringing people to my house for food and drinks. I always love doing that. And often sometimes various events like that get shortchanged because I look at my laundry list of things I want to do and all the food I want to prepare. And I think, how am I going to do this? And so I'm hoping that this book, this cookbook, will give all of us some ideas so that we can bring those people together, the food, and enjoy them. Because isn't that what food's all about, right? I mean, food is about bringing people together, sitting down, and just it's a means to converse, to enjoy. And I kind of like that concept. So anyway, it's called Make It Ahead. It comes out tomorrow. You can buy it on our website, barefootcontessa.com, and get a signature from her. And then you can also on that website find where she's going to be having her book signings, or you can pick it up at Amazon or your local bookstore and just ask them to have it at their bookstore. I'm sure they will have it there already, but if they don't, I have no doubt that they will order it for you. I hope you've enjoyed this week's Petit Plaisir, where each week ideas are shared to make the everyday all the more enjoyable. Tune in at the end of each Monday's podcast, where I'll recommend a book, a film, a recipe, or from time to time introduce you to an expert who offers insight into how to live simply luxuriously. Anything that is a simple pleasure to satiate your sophisticated taste. Thank you for tuning in to the SImple Sophisticate podcast. For more ideas and inspiration, stop by the blog, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com, or subscribe to the weekly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox every Friday to help you stay caught up on the most recent podcasts and blog posts. Until next Monday, bonjour!